back Jamie Fidel from the Vermont Natural Resource Council.
Thank you. Thanks for having me in today. Appreciate the opportunity to testify on H126. Jamie Fidel, I'm General Counsel and Forest and Wildlife Program Director at Vermont Natural Resources Council. Also here offering testimony on behalf of the Forest Partnership, which is a coalition of conservation organizations, including Audubon Vermont, Vermont Land Trust, the Vermont chapter of the Nature Conservancy, and Mara Notes is here with me, Trust for Public Land and Vermont Conservation Voters. And obviously, every organization that's part of the coalition is interested in the bill and can offer input on their own, but we operate as a partnership to try and bring some efficiency to you so that you can have a perspective, consolidated perspective. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of background in support of H126 and then just some general comments. And thought this morning was excellent, like overview from the scientific perspective. Ryan Rubizzo and Liz Thompson really gave some great, scientific underpinning of both the need for the bill and some of the scientific thinking behind it. So I'm really not going to spend a whole lot of time on that, other than to just maybe at a high level, just kind of focus on so many important functions that our intact lands provide and forest land, in particular, and our intact waters. But healthy and connected forests, critical for climate protection, forest sequester and store carbon, leading carbon sink, disaster mitigation, Forest Service headwater storage to reduce downstream flooding in our communities, clean water protection, forests provide critical ecosystem functions in clean drinking water, habitat protection, forests provide diverse habitat for wildlife and plant species that are currently under duress from climate-related impacts, and you heard about that this morning. And our overall health and well-being, forests maintain our physical health and mental well-being. Healthy forests are also an economic engine in Vermont. Forest-based manufacturing, outdoor recreation, and tourism employ approximately 13,000 Vermonters and contribute about 1.5 billion in revenue every year. And so that's just on the economic side. If you factor in the ecological side, as I believe Charlie Hancock told you this morning, you get sort of a 9-to-1 return just on conserving land with the ecosystem services that come with it. So there's a huge economic opportunity just as we look at our forests and the role that they play. So while Vermont is a heavily forested state with 3/4 of our state is covered by forest, it's roughly 74% according to, we look at the Forest Services information, forest inventory analysis. They say we're roughly at about 74% in the state. You may see some different statistics and there's different models or approaches to looking at it. But while 3/4 of the state is heavily forested, it's not the whole story. As I testified here previously, recently, closer look reveals that our forests are being converted and fragmented by rural sprawl. We've been calculating that at VNRC and we have statistics on that. And our forests are in active decline with an estimated 12,469 acres being converted on an annual basis to development. That's based on the Forest Services data that I just referenced. So at this rate, over 300,000 acres of forest land will be lost by 2050. So forest loss poses a significant threat to our climate resilience, the maintenance of functioning natural ecosystems, and working and recreational lands. Furthermore, that loss threatens our ability to maintain a resilient landscape that supports wildlife and biodiversity, especially in a changing climate. So according to the 2021 Vermont Climate Assessment, which was done, 92 bird species in Vermont, including the hermit thrush and the common loon, are expected to disappear from Vermont within the next 25 years. So this is sad, and this is what we're facing. And then if you compound in, as you were having some discussion this morning, the fact there's climate change, but then there's a whole host of other sort of challenges playing out on the landscape, sort of the pattern of how we develop. And that is going to continue to compound the challenges for maintaining biodiversity. As I've already mentioned, forest loss is also, well, it is resulting in decreased carbon sequestration and storage in our forest and increased carbon emissions. This has been documented in a number of studies. State studies, 2017 Forest Carbon Inventory documented that the total annual carbon uptake was less than in 2015. and then in previous decades, in part due to decreasing acres of forest land. More recent carbon inventory confirmed that land use change has resulted in net emissions in Vermont, which is concerning because forest land that is converted not only emits stored carbon, but it also reduces future forest carbon sequestration. And then analysis recently conducted for the Vermont Climate Action Council indicates that forests provide the largest source of carbon sequestration and storage in the state. And we've seen a steady decline in sequestration. If that trend continues, the state will find it challenging to meet the Global Warming Solution Act's net zero target by 2050, even if our emission reduction targets are achieved. So because of all these benefits that forests provide, accelerating forest land conservation and keeping Vermont's forests as forests is one of the most important policies, and it's one of the most important climate policies that we could implement in Vermont. In addition, planning to maintain a resilient and connected landscape with large forest blocks and connected habitat is an established priority, already an existing established priority for land managers, state and federal agencies, legislators, many non-governmental and forestry entities. So as recognized in the findings of the Global Warming Solutions Act, according to the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, the conservation and restoration of Vermont's forests, floodplains, and wetlands, and the promotion of forest management farming practices that sequester and store carbon are critical to achieving climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, or a host of co-benefits, such as improving air and water quality, economic vitality, ecosystem functions, local food systems, creating more climate resilient communities and landscape. And a lot of attention to reducing the rate of forest land conversion and loss in Vermont. This goes back to even 2007, when Governor Douglas's Commission on Climate Change had 38 recommendations. And at the very top, from a cost benefit perspective, was keeping forests as forests or reducing the rate of forest land conversion. And that plan back in 2007 explained that central to curbing the state's greenhouse gas emissions is the conservation of Vermont's significant existing green bank, our working landscape, our abundant forests, our maintenance of open land. Indeed, Vermont's most precious and effective mechanism for countering climate change is our forested landscape, which represents nearly 80% of the state's land area and provides us with a rich array of services such as clean water, stable and fertile soils, and a vibrant recreation and tourism industry that benefits both the culture and economy of our state. And since 2007, we've not reduced the rate of forest land conversion. We've gone from 80% of forest in Vermont to 74%. So with this in mind, the recently developed initial climate action plan underscores the need for accelerated land conservation and a whole host of strategies to try and reduce the rate at which we're losing our forests. And for example, as you've already heard, the climate action plan specifically endorsed the strategy of investing in strategic conservation in order to increase the pace of permanent conservation towards 30 by 30 targets described in the federal report, Conserving and Restoring America the Beautiful, with Vermont Conservation Design acting as a guiding plan for prioritization of efforts. So with all of this as background, I'd like to say that we support this bill. We supported it last year. We continue to support this as a really important bill. We supported to develop a plan to advance the climate action plan's goal of increasing the pace of land conservation, in addition to broad planning to maintain a resilient landscape in Vermont. We agree that the value of our forests lie in their broad uses, supporting biodiversity, community and climate resilience, as well as our outdoor recreation economy and our forest lands enterprises. All of these uses are supported in the bill. And this bill will help maintain the durability of the lands that contribute to our rural economy and our tourism and recreation economy, in addition to providing an invaluable underpinning for our ecological well-being and all the species that are here in the state. It's really important to see this bill for what it is. It's a planning process. It defines some goals for the state for accelerated land conservation, and it initiates a planning process. It's a plan based on stakeholder input. And we think that the plan, in order to work, is going to have to focus on working with willing landowners. That's how conservation works in Vermont. It takes a willing landowner, a landowner who's interested in conserving their land, to then affect that conservation, whether it's a group like the Trust for Public Land or any of the land organizations that work with creating more public land, or the agencies, the state agencies or federal agencies that are adding land to their land base, or the easements that are affected with landowners. It's all done with willing landowners. And so I know it can, I've heard a bit, maybe there could be some confusion. Is this bill creating some kind of statewide mandate that we're going to conserve 50% of our land base? It's going to be an X, Y, or Z parcel, and that's going to be mandated on landowners. But conservation doesn't work without a willing landowner. So it's almost, that's their property interest, is in conserving their land. And the demand right now for landowners that want to conserve their land and need available funding to do it is far out of whack. And so there's a real pent up demand for willing landowners who want to help conserve Vermont's character and our, rural economy. And we don't have, so that having a plan to look at the best ways to try and address that bottled up demand and need is really valuable.
Representative Stebbins has a question.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Sorry, so we have a lot of landowners wanting to conserve, or we don't have enough?
We have more landowners that want to conserve than we have available funding to help them do it.
Thank you.
Representative Smith.
Why do we need to fund landowners that want to support conserving their land? We don't need to give them money, do we?
No, and it can work in a couple of different ways. Sometimes there is available funding, like through a program like the Forest Legacy program at the federal level, that has money available to pay landowners outright in fee for conserving their land. Oftentimes, the other mechanism is a landowner will donate a conservation easement, and there's certain tax benefits that comes along with that, and long-term planning benefits that go along with that. But there's actually a cost to the landowner through going through that process to actually, accomplish the easement. There has been some funding over time that's tried to offset some of those costs.
Are you referring to current use?
No, just a landowner who actually donates their development rights through a conservation easement, working with a land trust, for example.
Okay. Thank you.
And then, as I think was mentioned this morning, but it's worth highlighting that, and we've looked at a lot of this work ourselves too, there's the Trust for Public Land report that talks about the return on investment when we conserve land, that there is like this 9-to-1 return. There's also been things called cost of community services examinations. In New Hampshire, they do this a lot because in New Hampshire, they don't reimburse municipalities for lost revenue at the municipal level for their current use program. Here in Vermont, we do. And the way that they support growth in the current use program in New Hampshire is to do cost of community services reports, which show that it's actually more beneficial to communities to conserve land generally because there's less services that go along with that land. And so the conservation that's accomplished, actually is a valuable economic, impetus for the state to continue to support their current use program.
So when you say they do cost of community services reports, they do them annually, they do them as a state, or?
No, I know I've been told that this is what they do, as I've talked to some tax experts, and I've been really wanting to go and find some examples of those to see how they do it. But I think it's come up in certain municipalities where they've kind of forced this question.
Well, I remember those studies from way back when we were starting BHCB, and we had them here.
Done some, I believe Deb Brighton's done some of this analysis for the land trust at times. And so it could be valuable to find some of those historical, and it's not to say that it happens in every case, but generally if you have conserved land and you're not, right, there's not roads and services and it just, I don't need to explain to you the services that go along with developing our land. So we support the goals in H126, advancing permanent conservation of working lands and natural areas by the target dates, and creating a framework for maintaining a resilient landscape, employing a suite of diverse tools using the ANR's Vermont Conservation Design as a guide. We also recognize that the bill specifically asks for any recommended modifications or additions to the conservation categories in the bill. And, if we're reading that language right, then we believe that will allow for a very robust discussion during the planning process about the best mix of tools, including those that ensure equitable outcomes to advance land conservation in Vermont and to maintain a resilient landscape for diverse values and uses. I'm currently a advisory member of the Forest Future Strategic Roadmap process, and I can't underscore enough the value of having a long-term and robust planning initiative to look at the importance of our forest economy with a very targeted look at the forest product sector. And this bill is a necessary and very complementary component of planning in the state to determine how best to maintain the actual land base that is so vital to our working lands and forest economy, and vital to maintaining biodiversity, myriad ecosystem service functions, and the very character and identity of our state. And so, like the Forest Future Roadmap, this bill would develop a plan with recommendations, and the recommendations would then need to be discussed and implemented by the legislature. I really believe in planning. I've been a part of a lot of stakeholder groups and planning initiatives, and I know at times we can question another planning process. Yet, for the work that we do, I think I'm speaking on behalf of all the forest partnership groups, what could be more valuable right now than having a complementary two-step process where we're both planning the future of our forest economy and planning the future of our forests and our land base and how we're going to maintain it. And if we're doing them in disjointed ways versus having this complementary approach at the same time, I think we're really missing an important opportunity. Finally, we support the vision in the bill to engage a diverse stakeholder group to build support and determine how best to achieve land conservation targets and the VCD goals. We appreciate the work that the state agencies and VHCB and TREA and other stakeholders who have been interested in this have done to begin to develop a framework for a conservation planning process. And we do support modifying the bill to recognize the role that in the resources that VHCB is offering to assist with the implementation of the bill. And I guess I would just close that, here I've spoken on behalf of VNRC and Forest Partnership, but Forest Partnership groups all individually have a lot to bring to this conversation. Of course, are all individually available to you to follow up in any capacity. We'll continue to track the bill and remain interested in its progress.
Great. Thank you for your testimony. Remind us again who the Forest Partnership members are.
Yeah, so it's Audubon, Vermont, Vermont Nature Conservancy, chapter of the Vermont Nature Conservancy, Trust for Public Land, Vermont Land Trust, Vermont Conservation Voters, Vermont Natural Resources Council.
Thank you. Representative Sibilia.
Thank you, Jamie, for your testimony. And a couple of things I want to make sure that I'm clear on. So the bill actually does three things. We are putting new definitions in statute of certain types of conservation areas, which I don't have questions about, but I think we're doing that. We also are putting in statute. Is it or we're putting it in permanent statute or session law? I don't have a good sense of that, and you're probably not the right person to ask. The goals, and that I'm a little worried is not clear enough. I have questions about myself. And then we are also creating a plan. Would you agree that's what we're doing? The three.
I guess I'd have to look closely at the bill because the definitions that are the categories of land conservation.
Yep.
I think you're suggesting that we're creating these as statutory categories, and I just want to look at the bill and see if that's the case, or if we're creating these categories to inform the planning process in our long-term conservation goals. And then to plan to see, are these the right categories? Are there any other additions or modifications? And so I'm not sure we're creating actually statutorily required categories versus this helps to inform the overall planning process and our long-term goals of what we would hope would be represented, tracking that USGS kind of gap analysis definitions.
Okay. The problem I'm trying to solve, I am having a hard time understanding why this bill was vetoed. So, and what the conflict is here, and you can't answer why the bill was vetoed because you didn't veto it, but what the conflict is. And so, you know, so far as I'm going through this, it just seems like there's some maybe clarification issues or language issues. So that's why I'm asking you, would you agree that there are three things we're doing here besides the plan? We are putting definitions in statute, we are putting goals in statute, and we are doing a plan.
I think we're putting definitions into a bill to help inform a planning process.
Okay, so we're not putting those in statute.
I don't know. I mean, maybe this is a better question for
Council. Okay, sorry.
But
okay. And then I was having a conversation with our last witness, Trey, just about, we referenced 20 by 20 or 30 by 30, 30 by 30, and 50 by 50. And so for me, I'm trying to make that make sense as a math equation in my head. Like, how do we get there? Like, okay, that's the goal. How do we get there? But I don't think that that's actually what we're doing. I think we're doing something a little bit different, and that's maybe just a strategy to getting there. I think we're trying to so I'll be quiet. Can you help me with that? So, and I think that can be confusing. It's actually a little bit confusing for me because I'm trying to make the math make sense. And I think it's actually something different that we're doing that's a strategy for. So we're trying to protect those connected places and biodiverse regions. And this is a strategy for getting there. So can you throw me a lifeline here?
I think so. I mean, I think you've been hearing about Vermont Conservation Design, which is this incredible blueprint to say how are we going to maintain a resilient landscape and maintain our ecological integrity. And there's a huge economic integrity underpinning it in the plan too, because it includes a lot of working lands. And we've got these huge threats and challenges right now. I mean, the land use trends are not going in a great direction for maintaining that resilient landscape. And so I think we're trying to develop a plan to say, how can we get at meeting Vermont Conservation Design has a much higher target of like 74%. How can we get to conserve levels by 2030? How can we create a plan to get to 50% by 2050? And how can we roll up our sleeves and figure out strategies to get there?
Yeah.
I think then there's going to be recommendations that we'll need to ponder and chew on and say, how do we fund this work and what's the capacity? And how do we work with willing landowners? Do we have all the right strategies in place? So
I'm not really seeing the conflict, and maybe there is none. So, but I think, I don't know if I said this to you yet, Jamie. You know, it's really important to me to be able to explain what we're doing to my neighbor.
Yeah,
and I can't do that. Well, I can, but I can't tell them why they should. I can't in detail actually yet. So I'm trying. So that's the nature.
If I was explaining this to my neighbor, I would say we're trying to hold on to the best of Vermont.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, members, we need to go to the floor. So thank you for your testimony, Jamie, and we'll adjourn for the day. And before, sorry, keep doing that. Just a heads up, looking ahead to tomorrow, please, on your agenda, we will have Legislative Council in at 11 o'clock. Talk about household hazardous waste. We're going to shift gears. I want you to remember all those questions you had after testimony earlier in the week. And after lunch tomorrow, we're going to continue talking about household hazardous waste. But while we have our Legislative Council in here, I want folks to ask those they were like logistics questions. How does the EPR work versus a fee? And so please get your head back into that before